It's 8:42 p.m. A text pops up. "Hey, could you help me this weekend?" And before she even finishes reading the text, her body reacts. Her chest tightens, her jaw clenches, her brain starts calculating. Can I move things around? How tired am I going to be? Will she be mad at me if I say no? She hasn't responded yet, but internally, she has already said yes. Because maybe yes feels safer than just saying, I'll have to think about it. And saying, I'll have to think about it feels safer than saying no. And for many women healing from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, this is familiar territory. This reflexive people-pleasing that has become almost automatic. But tonight, something is different. Instead of responding immediately, she pauses. She notices herself. She checks in with her body. Something subtle is beginning to shift. And today, that shift is what we'll be exploring. Who shows up when automatic accommodation isn't your driving choices? Welcome to Reclaiming Me, a trauma-informed podcast helping women with complex PTSD heal the lasting impact of childhood attachment wounds from parents and caregivers, so you can finally release people-pleasing and perfectionism and learn to trust in relationships, beginning with the one you have with yourself. I'm your host, Cindy Payne, therapist, trauma specialist, and a woman who has walked this path both personally and professionally. So before we go deeper in today's episode, I want to give you 3 anchors to listen for today, especially if this particular topic around people-pleasing feels extra tender. And the first one is that people-pleasing is protection, not your personality. As we've talked about in previous episodes, it began as a nervous system wisdom and not a weakness. And the second takeaway is that identity is built in pauses, not proclamations. The breath before the reply is where the self begins. And the third is that boundaries do not break safe love. They clarify it. The connections meant for you can hold your no. You don't have to memorize those. You only have to notice what resonates, because we're going to come back to those 3 at the very end. So let's go back to our story. And this is a story that begins in childhood for complex trauma survivors. I am titling Act 1 of this, the childhood reflex story. And to understand her present, we must go back. She grew up in a house where emotions were unpredictable. Anger could flare up without any warning signs. Praise often felt conditional. And silence sometimes meant tension. So she learned early: anticipate moods and adapt to survive. She became hyper-attuned to every footstep, every tone, every subtle facial expression. All became data for her. And Stephen Porges calls this neuroception. And I've talked about this in a previous episode, that neuroception means that the nervous system scans for safety beneath our conscious awareness. So, in other words, we don't even realize we're doing it. I talked about Ingrid Clayton in our last week's episode, and she describes the fawn response as staying agreeable, smoothing interactions, and explaining oneself preemptively. These are all strategies to reduce perceived threat. She didn't call it hyperattunement. Rather, she called it being responsible, being the easy one. But beneath that role was a nervous system that had been conditioned to anticipate everybody else and forget herself. And so every day she wore relational masks, and these relational masks helps her navigate connection safely. And so some of the masks might be the peacemaker, the caretaker, the high achiever, or the invisible one. And each mask kept her safe in a specific way. Each mask also hid her essence. So what looked like her personality on the outside, again, was really protection. So Act 2 is where we talk about psychological concepts that got embedded in this childhood and how it plays out in adulthood. Because as she moves into adulthood, her survival strategies become her patterns. And so let's talk about hyperattunement in a little bit more depth. Hyperattunement, we know, comes up when she notices moods before anyone speaks. Maybe she edits texts repeatedly. And maybe she even feels responsible for smoothing over the tension, even if the tension did not belong to her. Because we know that when we're attuned with somebody, we are connected with them, even if that connection is built on dysfunction. Another psychological concept that gets embedded that we talked a little bit about last week is this fawning response. Over apologizing, saying yes when she doesn't want to, even maybe laughing at jokes that hurt. Some of the relational masks that get formed, again, these can be family roles that are assigned to us, and we don't even know that we are being given this part to play. But the easy one, or maybe the golden child. And this is the child in the family system that maybe rarely expresses preference. And so they're just kind of very agreeable and they're not causing any conflict. And so they get praised for it. They get noticed. They get compared to the siblings maybe that are speaking out a little bit more. And there's a lot of pressure to maintain these relational masks. There's another mask, maybe called the peacemaker or the mediator. And these, again, can look like really easygoing jester type roles. But the peacemaker is really internally suppressing a lot of anger at what's happening around them and to them. But because their role has been assigned as peaceful, harmonious, they don't ever let that anger show. Or maybe the relational mask is the high achiever. So earning approval through productivity, through accolades, through being exceptional. And another relational mask could be the invisible one, the wallflower. This might be the one that avoids having needs, avoids expressing needs. So much like the easy one, they kind of just fade into the background. And perhaps some of these sound familiar to you, and maybe you've played a combination of some of these roles. There is what we call identity diffusion. that comes from these relational masks. Really, what that is just choices that are guided by fear or survival, not preference. So she doesn't know her own likes. She doesn't know her own dislikes, and she cannot articulate her needs. Her body carries what we call somatic markers. So an example of this would be the tight chest before saying no, or the stomach dropping after setting a boundary, or maybe the shoulders tensing up when expressing a preference. And then she remembers a line from the book Untamed, written by Glennon Doyle. We can do hard things. The hard thing isn't the confrontation. It might appear that way at first, but the hard thing is noticing. Noticing things like my body has been running the show and I get to pause. And that can be, again, very challenging because that would require permission giving from the self. And if you haven't been allowed to pause without fear or without criticism of maybe being selfish, that can feel risky. So that's why it is so hard to undo this pattern, but not impossible. So let's get back to Act 3. Act 3 is an adult boundary story. So back to the text at 8:42 p.m. This time, she pauses. She breathes. She checks her chest. And she asks herself, what feels true for me? And the truth might come in a subtle whisper at first, but the truth is that she's exhausted. And so she types, I'm going to pass this time. I need space to recharge. No over-explaining, no apology. And the response surprises her. Of course, let's plan another time. Her shoulders drop. Her chest begins to soften. And her nervous system recalibrates. This is a small win. And it's almost invisible externally. But internally, it's seismic because identity is not built in declarations, but identity rather is built right here in these micro moments of pause. So Act 4 is where we get to visualize our future self. So imagine her 6 months from now. She receives a text. Her body tightens again. She notices. She pauses. She checks in with preference. And sometimes she says yes. And other times she says no. She moves through life from a place of curiosity and choice rather than reflex. She visualizes the breath in her chest. She can experience the softness in her shoulders. And she now knows what it feels like to have a steadiness in her spine. And this is how identity begins to emerge. Not declared in one instant moment, but it is quietly cultivated over time. And I want to go back to the book Untamed by Glennon Doyle and integrate that a little into Act 5. I want to share an excerpt from this beautiful book if you have not read it. Glennon writes, I am learning to trust myself. I am learning that I am allowed to take up space. I am learning that my voice matters. So, saying no to that weekend text, she is practicing this. We are all untamed in some way, and we can break free of the stories that were handed to us. Her childhood story said that survival required pleasing. And now, as an adult, she is choosing a new story. And that new story is that preference, having choice, shapes her identity. The braver we are, the luckier we get. And each one of those pauses is bravery. And each honest response begins to rewire something really ancient. And so let's talk about what could happen in Act 6, which is the integration and the neuroplasticity piece of things. So I love this because I get to nerd out a little bit and talk about the brain and just how amazing it is that we can create new neural pathways. So if she keeps practicing this, the pause, the breath, and responding from a place of honesty, her brain literally begins to change. And how this works is that anytime we do something repetitively, it builds a new pathway. But if we've been raised and praised to do something one way, it might feel really difficult at first to create this new pathway because there's going to be resistance. But each time she interrupts that automatic yes, what she's actually doing from a neuroscience perspective is teaching her amygdala that this moment is not an emergency. And so remember, the amygdala is the fear center emotional hot seat of the brain, right? So it's the first thing that gets activated. And until we become conscious of that, it's really difficult sometimes to choose a different pathway. But she has been doing this for a while now. So she learned and is still learning that discomfort is not danger and disappointment is not abandonment. And setting a boundary is not going to result in catastrophe. And so when she's doing this and responding from a place of choice and embodiment, the alarm system begins to soften. And her body is still going to react sometimes because, again, we are humans and we are wired so intricately. But her body recovers faster. And when the body is recovering faster, we are more regulated. And when we are more regulated, we have more coherence. So back to identity. Identity gets to reorganize around our preference instead of threat. And she can tolerate frustration without going into nervous system collapse. She can feel a sense of guilt and honor and acknowledge that without fixing anything. She can stay connected to herself without disappearing. And some relationships will begin to recalibrate. And some of those relationships will deepen. Because remember, boundaries don't break safe love. And in fact, it has the opposite effect. Boundaries clarify things. So I want to come back to our 3 anchors. And that is that people pleasing is, again, protection. It's not our personality type. And this one is a big one. It really gets me because I hear a lot, like, she's a people pleaser. Like, we just use it as like a adjective to define who that person is. No, it's so much more detailed than that. Your nervous system was brilliant, and now it is learning something new. And secondly, is that our identity is built in pauses, not proclamations. So before in childhood, when you needed to appease, please, do things to keep yourself safe, that can be mistaken for our identity, right? Like, I am a people pleaser. I am a performer. I am a perfectionist, right? But pausing, right, allows the breath before the reply. And that is where your self begins. And last but not least, boundaries do not break safe love. Boundaries clarify. And the right connections can hold your no. So maybe the shift isn't answering, who am I? Because I think we can get really lost in that question a lot. I mean, that feels really abstract. Who am I? Maybe it's trusting that every honest pause is already an answer. And the more we can pause honestly and drop into our body and really listen to what it's trying to tell us, we can find that answer without outsourcing our emotions. So if you're listening right now, I invite you to think of one moment coming up in the next 48 hours. It could be a text that you need to send. It could be a request that you need to respond to. It could be an invitation that comes up just on the spot. And instead of asking yourself, what should I say? What should I say? Ask yourself, what would feel true for me in that moment? And if it's, I'm not sure, then I think you have your answer. The truth is that you need more time to process. Or if it's, this is a full body no, and I feel it, and I don't want to abandon myself, I think you have your answer. It's a no. But most importantly, you don't have to act on it yet. Just really practice the habit of noticing the answer, observing what it feels like in your body to already have an answer. Because that is where identity starts. And so these are really exercises to help you get to know that part of yourself that you didn't get a lot of access to in your formative years. And in our next mini episode, our Wednesday midweek reframe, we're going to be making this skill even more practical. Because again, asking who am I can feel so big and abstract and overwhelming. So instead, we're going to be shrinking it down to one grounding question. What feels true for me right now? Notice I said right now. So not forever and not for everyone, but just right now. And we'll practice how to ask it and how to separate it from survival reflex so that identity becomes something you build one honest choice at a time. So I hope you'll join me on Wednesday and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you leave feeling a little lighter, a little more grounded, and a little closer to trusting yourself and your inner experience. If this episode resonated with you, please follow or subscribe so future conversations can meet you when they're needed. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. That's one of the ways this work reaches the people who need it the most. You can find me on Instagram at Cindy Payne Rooted, and you can also visit me at cindypayne.com, where you'll find all episode links, blog posts, practice updates, and a free people-pleasing style quiz designed to help you notice your patterns with more compassion. And remember, every small step towards healing, self-trust, and presence matters. You are worthy of this journey. Thanks, everyone.